2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes.
To fly, to soar,
Tranquility Base here.
to reach the unreachable
Stand by for splashdown.
and come home again. It's an ongoing quest, an inspiring story, living here for now half a century at the San Diego Air and Space Museum.
We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the San Diego Air and Space Museum, a legacy institution here in our Southwest region and really the entire United States.
The legacy began in 1961 when a nonprofit group of citizens proposed the idea for a museum to showcase San Diego's place in aviation history. The San Diego Aerospace Museum opened on February 15, 1963. Housed in the old Balboa Park Food and Beverage Building, 1 million visitors would walk through the doors its first year. You could see the Navy's first seaplane, the Curtiss A-1, and even the original rocket engine from the sound barrier breaking Bell X-1.
It started out with about 15 airplanes. We have now well over 110 total in the collection, not counting certainly the nearly 3 million images in our archives and library. We have the third largest archive and library in the nation.
To build that kind of collection, the San Diego Aerospace Museum has gone through some remarkable changes. In 1965, it moved to the park's electric building and soon acquired perhaps its most famous replica.
This is the only true flying replica of the Spirit of St. Louis. It last flew 10 years ago in 2003. But this one's a little bit special because it's got some DNA that's a little bit unique.
Unique because its creation was overseen by T. Claude Ryan, the aviation pioneer who designed and built the original Spirit, which in 1927 carried Lucky Lindy on the world's first solo transatlantic flight. By the 1970s, the museum had far outgrown the old electric building. San Diego itself was also booming, and soon the City Council approved a new one-of-a-kind home for the museum, the historic Ford Building. Built by Henry Ford on a part of Balboa Park once used by the Marines, the Ford Building was created for the 1935 California Pacific International Exposition.
Buenos dias, señoras y caballeros. We give you the fiesta at San Diego. California's traditional hospitality, handed down for generations from the gracious days of the Spanish dons, is beckoning millions of guests to San Diego's California Pacific International Exposition.
Ford knew millions would visit the exposition, and he wanted to make sure they saw his latest products. The building stands 110 feet tall, and unlike the Spanish colonial design found throughout the rest of Balboa Park, the Ford Building was modern and streamlined. Inside, visitors could tour the latest automation and even test drive the cars for themselves.
Hop into a 1935 car, and we're off.
When the exposition ended, Ford donated the building to the city of San Diego, and 40 years later, the space created for cars was now slated for planes. But there was one problem. On February 22, 1978, shortly before the San Diego Aerospace Museum was to move into its new home, its old home, the Electric Building, burned to the ground, taking with it a large part of the museum's historic collection. To replace years of aviation treasure, a recovery fund was spearheaded by then-Mayor Pete Wilson. Then in 1980, exactly 2 years after the devastating loss, the San Diego Aerospace Museum reopened in the now beautifully updated Ford Building. If it flies, chances are you'll find it here. After all, San Diego not only gave the world the Spirit of St. Louis, built at what is now Lindbergh Field, but nearby North Island, the very birthplace of naval aviation.
When you look at the birthplace for naval aviation right here at Naval Air Station North Island, it means so much to us. In another part of the museum, of course, we have a flying replica of the original 1911 Triad that Glenn Curtiss sold to the Navy right here in San Diego. And of course, behind me right now is the famed A-4 Skyhawk, a wonderful airplane that I personally have about 2,000 hours in.
Kids of all ages get a chance to log their own flight hours. Where simulators make you the pilot, you can even touch a real craft from outer space.
This is the original Apollo 9 capsule. This was flown into space. My joke around here is I keep telling them to paint it, but they won't. So this is how it looked when it came back from space.
Tranquility, be advised there are lots of smiling faces in this room and all over the world, over.
In 1986, the museum joined forces with the International Aerospace Hall of Fame. Each year, a gala is held to celebrate achievements in air and space, from legendary test pilot Chuck Yeager's breaking of the sound barrier in the Bell X-1.
That's one small step for man,
To the moment Neil Armstrong became the first man
one giant leap for mankind.
to step onto the moon.
Neil was such a professional and such a gentleman, and we all still remember his wonderful words, so inspiring to those next greatest generations.
One of the most remarkable things you'll see here at the San Diego Air and Space Museum is the history that's actually painted right onto the walls. This mural by Juan Larranaga is 450 feet long, 20 feet high, and goes through the entire history of human transportation, and it ends with the artist's vision of the future.
When the artist completed the mural in 1935, he had to envision what the next several decades might look like. As you can see, it's very Buck Rogers in style. And while we were never shot out of a cannon to get into space, we actually got there on our own.
What began as the San Diego Aerospace Museum is today the San Diego Air and Space Museum, a living testament to not only where we've come from, but where we are headed.
When I see kids' faces in this Air and Space Museum, that's really what it's all about. I'm just corny enough to believe personally that we haven't had just one great generation, but we have future greatest generations, and that's really why we're here.